Hi everyone, welcome to part 2 of Behind the Curtain, exposing the concealed light of Tznius. And in the previous class, we started out with just the whole concept of what Hashem had in mind when he created woman and what the role was. And whether we know what the role was or we don't know, it doesn't negate the fact that there is a role to be played. But if you don't know what the rules are in the job that you're doing, then it becomes very hard, and you find yourself almost paying for consequences, and you don't know that you've even violated something. So it's very important to learn these things. And these things are really, this little mini series is just designed to kind of give you the foundation to go out and start learning on your own. And a lot of these questions that you may have, again, they vary from where you're living. And we're going to get into all that in a later lesson. But in the previous lesson, we kind of brought down this concept from the curtains, brought from the Mishkan, and how the curtains were the first thing to be constructed. And we learned that the curtains have this feminine aspect, as denoted by the word mekabel, which has that root word kabeh, which has that kuf bet lamed. And we talked about, the mekabel being a receiver, which is a female attribute. As we all know, the male is the giver and the female is the receiver. And we learned the concept of the prerequisite and how this prerequisite must be there in order for Hashem's presence to kind of dwell among us. As it states in the Torah that he's not going to look upon anything unholy. So when we don't have this in place, Has v'shalom, we open ourselves up to attack from all kinds of enemies and all kinds of illnesses, lo aleinu. And we also brought out the concept of those things being so valuable that they are hidden, and hence that Hashem is being of the most value. And we see that he himself hid himself from the beginning of creation. And so what an awesome thing that of all his creations, we were really created very much in line with a lot of Hashem's own attributes. And not everyone is made with Hashem's attributes, but not the way the woman was made. I think that we mimic so much of this mystery that Hashem has created. There's like an aura of mystery. And that's really what the woman also embodies, but also that she protects, hence the reason why that he took us from the rib. So we know that things of value we conceal, but things that are less value, we don't conceal. We kind of expose them out. Hence, the last question we left off in the previous lesson was, why don't we see our value? Because we see this horrendous phenomenon that's going on where there's this exposure of everything. And again, I've mentioned this in a few shirim, that this is a topic that many women and men don't want to hear about. They just don't want to hear about it. But you should ask yourself, why is it that when negative decrees come upon a person or a community, lo aleinu, everyone is so eager to take on, they want to take on challah baking, they want to take on Tehillim groups, they want to take on, lighting Shabbos candle groups, tzedakah groups, all great things. But you ever notice that's not what the Rebbeinu ever, when women ask, what should we do, Rabbi, what should we do? The first thing they say is you have to upgrade in Tznius. So why are they saying that? They're saying that because they know that without this prerequisite, there is a hole in the vessel and you can't hold on to bracha. So we've sent, Has v'shalom, we sent away Hashem's presence. Something else is going to occupy. And if you don't have Hashem guarding you, guarding your tents, I mean, Hashem Yirachem, it's really not a funny thing. But we're going to talk about now Tznius as it relates to the behavior part and why. We're going to talk about, this whole concept and culture and some of the things. The nice thing I think about this lesson today is that the things that we're going to talk about in today's lesson, you're going to hear them and you're learning them. And we always call it in the Kabbalistic term, the Chachma. And I always say that's the learning part of it. But the flip side, the other side of that is that there is Bina, and that's the understanding of it. And so when we talk about these concepts, you're going to kind of see them playing out in your day-to-day life, sometimes with your neighbors, with your family members, with your coworkers, with the guy at the grocery store, with the girl at the grocery store. You're going to see a lot of these things kind of play out, or you'll immediately something will come to mind and you'll remember, an experience that is, so in line with what we're talking about. And once you make the connection, then you've gotten to a place of dot, which is knowledge, which is really knowing something. And this becomes really, you're building a foundation because you understand the sages are not leading us wrong. They're telling us the way it is. And we're going to see that even in their day, just like fashion, what's old is new again. This is not something that is just, new to our generation. However, I don't know that there's ever been such a low state as the one we find ourselves in. And we find that, things that you would think that everyone should know, that they would just be common knowledge, we find that that's not the case. And the reason why we know is it's literally the questions that are coming forward. So hopefully this will give people the confidence to kind of, know a little bit more about this mitzvah that women, there's a reason why in the zechus of the righteous women that the Geulah will come. We are such an important part of bringing Hashem's presence down to this earth. So Besrat Hashem, with his help, we'll get through these lessons and we'll really take away a lot, and it'll give us the koyak to keep going and learning and teaching others what we've learned. Because whatever you learn, you have an obligation to teach. So here we go. So in the previous lesson, we talked about how behavior is an indicator of many things. And we also spoke about, how the Rabbanim could really tell a lot just by the behavior or the appearance of a person, even before they open their mouth. There's a lot of things you can tell about a person. And sometimes it's very shocking, the things that they seem to know. Because they know based upon looking at a person, what's going on and where they're holding. And even though there's exception to the rule, there's, usually behavior is almost always an indicator of someone's current state. And there's this really well-known saying, especially among the Goyim, it says people show you who they are and you should believe them. Because a lot of times we know, but I think sometimes we just chuck it to the side, that just because someone is saying all the right things doesn't mean that they really are living that MS. A lot of times we like to put on this show, if you will. And I always say, like, we're constantly branding our brand. We're always creating a brand and an image. But just as you would never, take grapes off a vine, crush them, and call it a wine, it's the same thing with someone's character. You kind of have to let it develop for a while to really see the true essence of a person. And, there's all these little catchphrases that talk about this all the time, and things like honeymoon phase. And, especially if you're looking for a shidduch, this is a great way to really kind of get to the root of what a person's personality is. And sometimes we have to take a step back and just really let the person reveal who they are. I think we're so eager to tell you all these things. And some of the things that we like to tell you is whatever, quote unquote gifts or attributes that we've acquired. And a person, everyone has gifts. And in my opinion, I think, just by observing life, that I think everyone has a little bit of every gift. But some people are born, really everyone is born with something that's a little bit extra. Just like we went through, why not the heart? Why not the leg? Why not the eye? We all have those aspects of arrogance, of jealousy, of envy. But there are certain things that kind of stick out more. So this is the same thing. If someone has been endowed with beauty or with wealth or prestige, intelligence, or even, speaking, that's also, a gift that's endowed to you. But again, we're constantly, creating this narrative. And a lot of times you'll find that people want to tell you right off the bat their narrative, because they want to start creating that brand because, you know, perception, I guess, is reality. If you perceive that a person is a certain way, even if that's not the MS, it becomes the MS somehow. Somehow we've created a new narrative, and all you need to do is get two people to believe it, and it becomes the MS. And this is a big thing that happens not just with women, it happens with men, and not just with, you know, Klal Yisrael, it happens with even the Goyim. And in this generation, the more that we sink lower and lower, the more we get attached to these physical things. And we want you to know how great we are, even if we're not really all that great. So we'll create a distraction so you can't really tell what's just behind the curtain, right? So I hope you guys are enjoying all these plays on words, you know. And I really want to thank Hashem, you know, for giving me the title, because it really, there's been so many play on words here. It's just, you know, Hashem has a great sense of humor. But some of the things you'll find when somebody meets you, you know, is that they'll lead off with their accomplishment, or if there's somebody like who has an attribute of beauty, you will see them play that up. They'll be very, you know, sometimes there's really people, guys and girls, who you look at them, they come in a room and it's like they take everyone's breath away, and everyone else feels like less than because it's so intimidating, their beauty. So, you know, that's one way, that's a physical. But for the rest of us average people, you know, at that point, we have to rely on the other gifts we have, which are not so visible, like your prestige or your intelligence or your ability to speak, or even, you know, wealth maybe is one of those things that you could probably tell, like beauty. It's kind of a more physical attribute. You know, and I used to work at a corporation where I did the legal collection for this corporation. So I was always in court. And it's funny because, you know, you would have like a doctor or someone who did something like really amazing, you know, and we're meeting because you're in court because you didn't pay a bill and you didn't pay it for quite some time. So immediately when they would see me, they want to say, you know, I'm Dr. So-and-so, or I do this for a living, or I do that. And they always want to give you a reason why they're not as bad as you may think they are, even though I've not formed an opinion one way or another. When I'm meeting you, you know, again, you're showing me who you are and I'm believing it. So, you know, you kind of train yourself to kind of take what the person's saying and put it on the back burner, because again, their actions are going to show you who they are. And the fact that they're leading out with this, trying to make these excuses as to why they didn't fulfill an obligation, is really a telltale sign of their true nature. Now, that's not to say that someone is a bad person per se, but it's an indicator. You know, why are we leading off with that? Why can't we just get to know each other for who we are? You know, this is who I am. I'm Devorah Esther. This is who I am. You know, take it or leave it. You either like my personality, we jive, we don't. You know, Shalom Yisrael. You go on with life. So sometimes we see this. And I'm just going to use myself for an example. So if I said, my name is Devorah Esther, and my father came from the same town as the Ranban. And we also came from the same town as Judah Halevi. And, oh, by the way, I happen to be a Levi. So right then and there, it's like, what's the purpose of that? You know, what's the purpose of that? For me to lead out with something like that would really just try to set up for you to think of me in a certain way, to hold me in prestige and this really high esteem, which has nothing to do with what I've done in life, right? Because the truth is, it's really great that you come from these great people or this great town, or your so-and-so was your Rav. Really all beautiful things. But Habibi, tell me about you. What have you done for Klal Yisrael? That's great. You have this potential. You come from all this dynasty. But tell me about what you've done. How are you bringing Hashem, you know, honor to Hashem's name? So sometimes we see that. And again, this is not an indicator that someone is a bad person, but this is a telltale sign that and maybe the person's aware of it, maybe they're not aware of it. But, you know, when you're leading off with this, sometimes I think we don't realize, our value. So we kind of feel like we have to tell you our value instead of thinking that people won't be able to see the true value of who you are. So now, because we've, become this, master of distractions, we've kind of also bought our own narrative. And we, at that point, will do anything to uphold this perception that people have, because now that's the reality, right? So this comes out also in other people's, in their personality and in the way they're behaving. And for instance, so now we're talking about Tznius. So we're going to talk about more about the beauty side of it, which every woman, in my opinion, is very beautiful. Everyone, and everyone has this appeal. Hence why Hashem is saying you must conceal it, because, if you're following Adorn with Dignity, we've talked about how men are wired differently, and the same way they could never understand truly how childbirth feels, will never truly understand what they're bombarded with in the visual, assault that they're getting every day from women, in their homes, if there's family members that are coming over, if there's friends, if there's people in the community, their coworkers, it's a constant assault. But again, like we said before, what is old is new again. And this is actually something that went on, and we're told that it actually brought on the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, because there was such a lack of tznius within the community. And, it's funny, because when you hear what was going on in that generation, you would think that you're talking about today, because women were just going out of their way to draw attention to themselves, not only in their dress, but in their behavior. And there was this, the Gemara talks about some of the things they did. It's funny, because one of the things they mentioned was things with their eyes, right? And when I heard it, the first thing I thought, cats have this behavior with the eyes, and it's called soft eyes, and it's how they tell you they love them. So they love you. So this, when I heard this, I thought this was kind of probably like, are we batting our eyelashes a little too much? Because men really do eat that up. And sometimes I think we know we're doing it. Sometimes we don't know we're doing it. But just like models, one of the biggest things that makes a model successful is that she's able to communicate with her eyes. So again, there are things that we're doing all the time, that we're sending out these messages, whether we know we're sending them out or not, which is why it's so important. It's not just a matter of how you're dressing, but how you're behaving. And, the Gemara also talks about, now I love shoes. I don't know if I would have done this, but they said that they used to hollow out the heels of their shoes and insert this kind of fragrance that when they walked, it would emit a fragrance, to everyone who was around. Now, it's funny because, we see this now, with, especially like in the office. I'm in an office, and there's some of the girls, they do this. And, if it wasn't because it was so serious, it would be comical, because they go through such great lengths to get attention. And a lot of them, they wear the excessive perfume that you can smell down the hall. Down the hall, you can smell it. And, there's this one gal, when I say she's like of, Amazonian height, now height is great because, I'm 5'3"3/4. So I'm always asking for some kind of help to grab something off the shelf. So, her height is really great. But, she uses her height to kind of bring on more provocative attention, on top of the fact that she's got to be like 5'11", mamash 5'11". She's got to be like 5'11". She puts on these heels. You can tell she's not buying her dresses in the tall section. She's buying them, in my opinion, I think in the petite section, because her dresses look like shirts. And, because there was this thing in the Gemara that I learned about, not making this excessive clack with your shoes. So a lot of times that, everyone always thinks I'm a ninja. Like I always I'm just there. I just appear because they don't hear me coming. But oftentimes, you can hear when somebody's coming, just not this excessive clacking. So I kind of try to walk in that manner. And one time I was walking, and you can hear obviously that I'm walking, but there was not this clack. So it probably in her mind, she thought I was one of the guys. And I caught her. She just flicked her hair. And when she turned around, so I think maybe she thought she was Bo Derek in the 80s. And when she saw it was me, it was almost like she gave me the, oh, it's you. So, you know, but this is the reality of what's going on. And this is like repeating itself. It's one thing you're talking about a Goya, like you don't expect them to know, right? They're in filth. A lot of them are in filth. A lot of them are, that's all. But this is happening with women of Klal Yisrael. So that's what makes it even more serious, that this is happening. And this is the most important mitzvah that you're going to do. And not only, I mean, it's not even like you're just, the skirt was at the border. I mean, this is like flat out violations. There's no way to even defend them other than to say that this is just such, it's really bad behavior, put it that way. And that's the nicest way I'm going to say it. It's one of the worst behaviors that you can really portray. And, I think what makes it even worse is that you have, in where I'm at, like I said, there's a lot of Yidden, but none of them are like, there's probably like 90% that are not frum. So you see this conversation going on, and because there's this, there's such violations there's already breach now of these boundaries. And then here comes the joking, which leads to excessive flirting, which all of a sudden leads to a touch. And this becomes very serious, and I've mentioned in my Adorn and Dignity, I have a Spanish background, and the old school Spanish way is, I mean, first of all, if something like that, if anyone in the family would have observed a man to touch you even accidentally, they would ask you, ¿por qué la confianza? And what that means is why the confidence. And what they meant by that is what in your behavior made him think it was okay for him to touch you that way, even in a joking manner. Even if they saw you excessively laughing, why does he think it's okay to even pass that line? So, this is really something that at one point was a pretty well-known and upheld rule. And really, they looked at you as the reason why, because somehow you're giving off these messages, even if they're on a subconscious level, that it's okay, that whatever touch or whatever, however far you go, it's okay. And men, let's be honest, men who are not, we see this all the time with Goyim, Has v'shalom, we see this with Yidden. If there's a green light, there's a green light. We are in such a low state, and the Yetzer Hara, unfortunately, has a lot of us in his grasp. And, there's only so many times that you can be bombarded. There is a reason why they call it a trap, and men do fall in this all the time. Hence why the woman is admonished so harshly from the Beit Din of Shemaim, because she really, again, is the conduit to all this. But I think what's more scary is, again, because we're branding ourselves and we're projecting this image. And I think a lot of times, everybody wants to be either the cool person, I don't want to say the cool kid because we're not kids anymore, but isn't it funny how high school just seems like it's never ended? But I think for a lot of us, we just want to be the it person, or we want to be around the it person. And somehow the card to get in, the VIP card to get in, is to also emulate this behavior. And this is why it's so important to really let someone's character develop in front of you, and you can kind of see what you're really dealing with. But in order to do that, you kind of have to slow down, not only from yourself wanting to expose everything, but for enough time for you actually take in the information that this person is giving out, whether it's verbally or in the way that they're behaving or in the way that they're dressing. And again, that's why, we always talk about fences in the Torah. But you have to think about this really, from the time I'm recording this, I think probably the most well-known storm that's hit us recently was probably Sandy. Hurricane Sandy, because it caused so much devastation. And I remember my mother-in-law, she had a beachfront property, which was about 2 blocks from the beach. And I remember that they were setting up these levees so that when the water would surge, it would try to hold off, and make this protective barrier. But what happened is, the levee got breached. And because there was no one there to reinforce it, and there was no reinforcement at all, not only did that point of entry get breached, but eventually the whole levee came down. And this is what happens in our day-to-day life, that there are barriers that are put in place, that the sages have put in place for us. Now, that's not to say that, like the levee, it can't get breached. But this is where we need to slow down and double down on what we've learned in order that we can reinforce the levee. Because if the levee breaches, then the whole levee, not just the point of entry, but the whole thing is now vulnerable to attack. And that, not just attack, but it can all come down. The whole wall can come down. And the Torah actually points out something, in a conversation that he was having with Moshe about the conversation he was going to have with Paro. And you see this concept where he threw the stick in front of Paro and it became a snake. And when he picked it up again, it turned back into the snake. This is the same thing with us. If we are constantly exposing ourselves to people who don't have any qualms about going out in a way that it's such a provocative manner that it's going to attract attention, and they don't care about wrecking a marriage, in time, has v'shalom, you become like the stick and you turn into the snake. Okay? But when you're drawing back, when you're doubling down, you're going back to your true essence. And that is the concealed essence. So sometimes, especially when we're going through this journey of Tznius, we have to ask ourselves, who are our friends? And it's very important to really take stock of who your friends are, whether they're on the same road, even if they're not at that level. If they're on the same road, Baruch Hashem, at least they have an awareness and they're in the struggle with you, but they're aware that they're in the struggle. But there are some people who they don't care. And that's not to say get rid of all your friends, because your friends are extremely important. And I'm going to close up and we're going to talk about the importance of friends. And we know that, friends are so important that the Torah also mentions something about this in Iyov. And we see this very clearly when Iyov is coming to get tested. Hashem says you can touch everything except his life, and you can't touch his friends. Right? Because this is coming to tell us that if you take away somebody's friends, there is a life risk here. There's a life risk. But you have to make sure your friends are worthwhile, right? That they are really people that you want to associate yourself with. If they are not the MS, then what good are they in times of storms? Right? Because they are also the ones that help reinforce that levee. And if you have people who are just wanting to have the great life all day, eventually the party ends. And they're so oblivious that when the levees are getting breached, there's no one really there to reinforce them, because they themselves have lost all the safeguards. It's done. So to go even further about the importance of friends, we're going to talk about, a group of friends that you may not even know that you have. And once you know that they exist, you're going to want them in droves, and you're going to want the most influential ones. And it's brought down in Tehillim, I believe 118:7. And it says that God amongst my helpers, I can face up to my enemies. So think about that question. God amongst my helpers. God amongst my helpers. So who are the helpers here? Who are the helpers that are going to, stand up with you in times when the levee is being bombarded and assaulted and they're trying to breach it? Who are those helpers? So it comes down that the helpers are your mitzvot, right? And again, doing challah, charity, tzedakah, all wonderful things. Even your learning of Torah, wonderful things. But for a woman, it's not that influential friend that's going to get you when you really have trouble. It's not the friend that you can call on. The most important friend, the most important mitzvah that a woman has is that of Tznius. It is the biggest friend that you're going to ever have. And your mitzvot are the only thing you're going to take with you to Shemayim. So now, if Tznius, it's the biggest friend you can acquire through just dressing and acting tzniut. I always like to point out that we see often again that Hashem loves the underdog. That's why he chose us. That's why he's always saying, love the convert, love the orphan, love the widow, feed the poor. You ever notice that? Hashem really loves an underdog. So even out of tzniut, there's an underdog even from that category of mitzvot, and that is the one of Kisur Rosh. And people really, to one thing, they don't want to take on tznius. Forget it. Then to tell them that you have to cover their hair, you would think that you were telling that you're taking away every last cent they're ever going to make in this life. It devastates people to that level. But if you meditate, on this, what we've just talked about, and we see there in Tehillim, God amongst my helpers. And if tznius is the biggest helper that you can acquire, I mean, you really want, we're all going to be going up to the Beit Din of Shemayim, and we're going to want some very powerful testimony on our side. And that day is coming very soon for all of us. And we're really going to want very powerful testimony on our side. So if you don't have this friend with you, right, and all you have, because whether you're making a friend that can testify or a friend that can prosecute, has v'shalom, somebody's going to be there at the trial. But if you don't have this mitzvah of tznius, you don't have this mitzvah of Kisur Rosh, you run the risk of having your levies breached. Because remember, we talked about without this prerequisite, you're kind of left without, any guard. There's no protection. Because you sent away the Shekhinah, you sent it away. Has v'shalom, you sent it away. So when you don't have that in place, you in turn become exposed. So that's it for today. And we're, Besrat Hashem, going to get into the next lesson. And we're going to start getting into those things that are permissible to us. And what, the basic guidelines are. And we brought this up about the Dat Moshe, the Dat Yehudi, and Minhag HaMakom. So we're going to start getting into these things, but we really want to set up the foundation of why it is so important for you to want to learn about this mitzvah and to want to take it on. But again, that's it for today, and I hope we'll all be together again soon, Besrat Hashem.